экономического и социального процветания, которое продолжалось вплоть, на мой взгляд, до 15 века, приблизительно 15-16 веков, после чего начался период упадка и привел к колонизации Центральной Азии, частично Китаем, частично Российской империи и Британской империи. И, на мой взгляд, вот это вот экономическое благополучие, процветание Кушанского царства, когда в одной только Ферганской долине около 70 городов было, в Чуйской долине было около 40 городов, Бактрия, вот исторический регион, который контролировался до этого греко-бактрийским царством, назывался страной 1000 городов. Была очень развита система ирригации, оазисы занимали большую площадь, чем они занимают сейчас, вот в Сурхандаринской долине, например, в Зеравшанской долине, в долине Балхи и так далее. Главное объяснение, на мой взгляд, вот этому успеху экономическому – это либеральный общественный институт. И прежде всего политика поддержки разнообразия. Культурного разнообразия, этнического разнообразия, религиозного разнообразия. Буддизм получил полную свободу распространения на территории Кушанского царства. Он пришел с Ганхары, Пешавар современный, и стал распространяться. Это было течение малого колеса от Хинаяны. Именно при Кушанах впервые Будда стал изображаться в человеческом обличии. Это было наследие греческого и эллинистического искусства. Таким образом, буддизм дошел до Китая. Но помимо буддизма существовали и другие культы, древние иранские культы, бактрийские культы, манихеизм, христианство дошло в определенный момент до этого региона. Но буддийские храмы играли огромную роль в распространении знания, грамотности. Это были центры настоящей культурной, не аристотелевская логика, диалектика буддийская. И люди получали образование, были дебаты. И, на мой взгляд, это сыграло огромную роль и в развитии торговли. Есть очень много научных работ, посвященных роли буддийских монахов в развитии торговли шелкового пути. Они сыграли огромную роль. Я думаю, что эти рецепты, они применимы и сегодня, и очень много научных работ по отношению к Средиземноморскому региону, Западной, Центральной Европы, например, приходят к тем же выводам, что именно либеральные институты позволили обеспечить на определенном историческом этапе бурный экономический рост и развитие в этих зонах. Так что конечно, сегодня речь пойдет, вот я хотел поприветствовать Эрику Эстер, она выпускница Гарварда, которая будет говорить о буддийском искусстве в Центральной Азии. Это всего лишь одна грань вот этого периода процветания Центральной Азии. Но я думаю, через эту грань мы можем заинтересоваться темой в целом и продолжить в рамках уже других лекций дискуссию о том, какой была Центральная Азия, какая она сейчас, и возможно ли вот такой вот культурный, экономический, социальный ренессанс в нашем регионе. Это большое спасибо вам за то, что вы здесь. И я надеюсь, что сегодня будет интересная лекция, дискуссия. I would like to thank you, Erica, for being with us today and for accepting to make a presentation of Buddhist South and Central Asia. It will be very interesting for all of us to listen to you and have a good discussion after your presentation. Thank you very much.
I also would like to welcome Erica and just say a few words about the person that will be speaking today. So Erica is majored in history of art and architecture at Harvard University. And from there, she moved on to Courtauld Institute in London, where she did her master's degree in Buddhist, in the history and conservation of Buddhist art. And she is also a writer and an essayist, and she is published fairly extensively in The Guardian, Slate, the New York Times, and she writes a lot about topics related to art in general. So today, when you will be asking questions, I just wanted to let you know that her interests range fairly broadly, you know, that it's not just Buddhism, that it's art in general. So you might want to, you know, like I said, keep that in mind. Also that over there in the corner, if we have Russian-speaking audience, so there are headphones that you can take, and there is going to be simultaneous translation. And please extend your warm welcome to Erica.
Can you hear me all right? Thank you, Maria, for that very warm and kind introduction. And thank you to Dr. Shamshia for inviting me to speak today. I'm very honored to be here at your invitation, and it is a pleasure to be able to speak about this topic for all of you today.
The mic a little bit.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. If there are any other problems, please just let me know. All right. So prior to this talk, I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Shamshia, and we actually spoke a little bit about this site. So it's sort of fortuitous that it should appear in my slideshow today. The title of this talk is Buddhist Art of Central Asia, Transmissions and Exchange. And to frame the discussion a little bit, I would like to read a short quotation from a catalog of Central Asian art that was published by the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, entitled Along the Ancient Silk Routes, in which the curators describe the Silk Road trade routes of Central Asia as a place where, quote, Jews mingled with Hindus and Zoroastrians traded with Muslims, valuable commodities from China and India, Rome and Persia changed hands, no doubt many times, before they reached their final destination. In all this traffic, perhaps the single most significant and lasting treasure transmitted along the Silk routes was the Buddhist faith, end quote. So in this talk, I'm interested in providing an overview of some key points in the Buddhist art history of this region, with particular attention to the key role that this geographic area played in spreading the Buddhist faith, as well as how we can use Buddhist art and material culture to understand shifts in theological notions, shifts in culture, and shifts in artistic technology. I hope in this talk to provide an overview of sorts as to how this transmission happened and what we can learn through looking at artwork and lasting material culture about the societies that produce those works. And in closing, I would like to briefly consider the conservation state of what we still have and how we might safeguard this heritage for the future. So for a bit of context, I would like to briefly discuss how Buddhism spread and changed over time, just so that we can get an idea of what we're talking about here. The birth and death dates of Siddhartha Gautama, the Indian prince who would go on to become revered as the Buddha, vary according to what sect you talk to. But the Buddha is generally held to have been born in either 563 or 480 BCE in Lumbini, which is in what is now Nepal, very close to the border with India, and to have made his great passing away, what is called in Sanskrit the Mahaparinirvana, what we would generally refer to as death, in either 483 or 400 BCE in a place called Kushinagar, which is an Indian city very close to the Nepalese border. The map here shows various points that were critical events in the life of the Buddha. These are now major pilgrimage destinations, of course. And I guess what's important to note here is that Buddhism began really as a religion concentrated in Northeast India and Nepal. But if we think sort of 1,000 years later, if we jump 1,000 years in history, which granted is quite a jump, but nevertheless, we would see that Buddhism in that period had expanded greatly to cover a really vast territorial expanse. It had covered not just Northeast India, but had penetrated into the subcontinent more broadly. It had reached Southeast Asia, both the mainland and the islands of the coast of Southeast Asia. It had reached Sri Lanka. And of course, most importantly for our talk today, it had moved up through Central Asia and then followed the Silk Route into China, into Korea, and gotten as far east as the Japanese archipelago. Now, this might not seem perhaps so significant or surprising. After all, if we did say that we're jumping forward in time by an entire millennium, one might argue, well, it's natural that a religion should spread over time. That's not surprising. But I would argue that we cannot simply take for granted or assume that all religions would naturally seek out more followers. We can contrast Buddhism's highly conversion positive approach with, for instance, attitudes in religions like Judaism, which lacks a real tradition of proselytizing, with the exception of, the limited exception, of Orthodox Jews who attempt to win secular Jews back to piety, which is again not an example of true conversion, but rather hoping to increase religiosity. One might consider also that the territorial scope of Buddhism far exceeds that of its fellow Indic religions, by which I mean Jainism, which was and still largely is restricted to the subcontinent and its diaspora, or Hinduism, which had followers in Southeast Asia, but really never made it into Central or East Asia. And therefore, in asking ourselves why it is that Buddhism spread so successfully, whereas other religions, including religions to which it is closely related, did not, we start to see the crucial role not only that Central Asia as a region played, but also that art plays in this story of religious spreading. By this I mean that Buddhism, in its ideas and explicitly in its scriptures, places an enormous emphasis on the spreading of the teachings of the Buddha as a way to gain merit for a positive rebirth. Importantly for archaeologists and art historians, this does not merely extend to preaching verbally, of which we would have no material record, but also to the production of books, statues, paintings, and other artworks. There is a passage in the Lotus Sutra, for instance, that reads, quote, "If there are persons who embrace, read, recite, expound, and copy the Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Laws, even only one verse, you should understand that such persons have already offered alms to 100,000 million Buddhas, and in the place of the Buddhas have fulfilled their great vow, and because they have taken pity on living beings, they have been born in this human world." End quote. In other words, the production of books and images of the Buddha was seen as a profoundly compassionate act, motivated by a desire to save the souls of others from ignorance and suffering caused by a failure to embrace or understand what they felt to be the true religion. Moreover, books and images of the Buddha and his sermons are referred to as the Dharmakaya, which is a Sanskrit word meaning truth body, and can be contrasted with the flesh body inhabited by the Buddha during his final time on earth, which was ultimately transient and illusory in nature. In a passage from the Vakali Sutra, the titular monk, Vakali, expresses a desire to see the Buddha, only to be upbraided by his religious teacher, who says, quote, "Why do you want to see this foul body? One who sees the Dharma sees me. One who sees me sees the Dharma." End quote. Here, the use of the phrase foul body implies that the Dharmakaya, the truth body, as exemplified by sutras and works of religious art, is not merely akin to the Buddha's body, but in fact superior to it, while those who view or read the works in question are in some sense in the presence of their Lord. Another way of gaining merit, according to Buddhist thought, would be to donate to support the creation and maintenance of monastic communities and the buildings that house them. Buddhism, especially in its early days, had a very skeptical stance towards money. And so the Sangha, which is the Sanskrit word for the community of monks and nuns, relied upon donations of food, and other forms of donations to allow them to exist and to survive. Thankfully, as we shall see, the extensive trade networks that built up through Asia during this time were able to supply enough cash flow to allow these communities to do far more than eke out a marginal existence. They could honor their religion by means of extraordinary and enduring works of art that gain their donors a shot at a better afterlife, and not to mention a small donor portrait to boot. So all of these religious ideas that I've discussed about works of art as not merely adornment, but in some sense functional objects that brought good things upon those who paid for and made them, would combine to motivate the creation of an incredibly rich artistic and architectural legacy throughout the Buddhist world, and help to justify why a religion so profoundly skeptical of the virtue of the material world would nevertheless invest heavily in all manner of decoration, jewels, and the like. We see Buddhist art in elaborately constructed cave temples and the brilliant, if increasingly fragile, murals that grace their walls. We see it in stores of books and paintings bricked up into sanctums or buried in the earth. We see it in sculptures large and small, of humble materials and grand ones. So all of this, as I said, accounts for, in a general theological sense, why devotees would have felt motivated to spread their religion and its art. But now, let's start looking at particulars and see how Buddhism spread in Central Asia, defined in a broad sense, and how its changes over time are both reflected in and advanced by artistic means of expression. So the first chapter of Central Asian Buddhist art that I would like to discuss today has to do in a very fundamental way with how we got the Buddhist art we have today in the first place. By which I mean how the very idea of depicting the Buddha's human form became accepted in the arts at all. We are all used to seeing pictures of the Buddha, whether it's a statue in a museum or sort of design on a t-shirt or what have you. However, for roughly the first 500 years of Buddhism, you see a lot of artistic production, a lot of architecture, but none of this art featuring a depiction of the Buddha in his bodily form. Instead, what you get is indirect representation, an empty throne, a stupa, a set of footprints, things of that nature. So here on the left, I'll use my pointer. We have what is called an aniconic representation of the enlightenment of the Buddha. So the Buddha is said to have meditated under a Bodhi tree, type of tree, and during that time, he was assaulted on all sides by demons that were led by the demon king Mara. But he resisted his temptations, he persisted in his meditation, and he eventually was able to transcend worldly enlightenments. And in this scene on the left, what you have depicted is merely the tree. So here's the tree and an empty seat with the demons on either side. But you don't have the bodily form of the Buddha. On the right, for contrast, is a depiction of the same scene, which is done in a separate place, in which you actually do have an image of the Buddha. So here again is the assault, and the Buddha, and the tree above his head. So here again, for reference, is another sort of contrasting aniconic representation of the Buddha, again from India, from a site called Nagarjunakonda. And what we have here is a story called The Great Departure, wherein the young prince Siddhartha Gautama decides to leave his royal life behind and ride away in secret in the middle of the night. And his horse is being carried so that the sound of the hooves don't wake his parents and stop him from fleeing and eventually achieving his destiny of enlightenment. In the first scene, however, and it's not a great photo, you have a horse without a rider. What you have instead is a parasol here that's shading what would be the Buddha. Parasols are a sign of royalty, and so this is a sign that someone, an important personage is there, but really not depicted. The image on the right, again, is perhaps a more familiar depiction, and here we have not only the horse and the parasol, but importantly, our hero as well. So this is the scene on the bottom with the horse and the Buddha. This style of Buddhist art that shuns figural representation with the Buddha is known as aniconic art, and it's somewhat of a mystery today to scholars as to why it should have come about in the first place. For one thing, neither of the other Indic religions, Hinduism and Jainism, have any sort of similar policy. And furthermore, there is no extant textual support as for why this might have been. In all three of the Abrahamic religions, for instance, you can point to areas of scripture, whether it's the second commandment or certain passages of the Hadith or what have you, that explicitly deal with your creation of images, whether it's permissible or impermissible. And we also have records of discussions and debates about whether or not image making would have been permissible in these religions. But there is no parallel really in Buddhism. Nevertheless, aniconism was really the rule for roughly the first 500 years of Buddhism. But this, one of the key factors in changing this was an area of Central Asia known as Bactria, which encompassed part of Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Pakistan. Of key importance here is the fact that Bactria was conquered by Alexander the Great. And this ushered in a time of strong connections between Central Asia and the Mediterranean world, not merely Greece. So it's important to note that scholars have also drawn connections between the art of Bactria and Levantine cities, or Palmyra, for instance, although a lot of historical discussions tend to focus merely on Greece. So this connection between Bactria and the Mediterranean world lasts long after the disintegration of Alexander's kingdom, and allows for a time of cultural and religious mixing that eventually trickles down into what is arguably some of the Buddhist world's most famous print. So beginning in the 2nd century BCE, a group of nomadic tribes from the deserts of Western China, known as the Yuezhi people, begin to migrate into Central Asia. And they eventually conquer and take over the area that was Bactria. The dominant Yuezhi tribe would eventually establish the Kushan kingdom, which would stretch down to include much of what is now Pakistan, Afghanistan, and northern and central India. Kushan rulers would also begin to make forays later on into what is now Xinjiang. And this is when we start to really get an explosion of images being made and an end to aniconism in Buddhist art. So the side-by-side I have here is a comparison between a Greek statue of Hercules, technically a Roman copy of a Greek statue of Hercules, and a Buddhist statue of Vajrapani. So we have the Buddha at the center, and flanking him is Vajrapani, whose name means thunderbolt bearer. And he's often featured standing next to the Buddha. So there's a lot to note here in terms of similarities. I think it's pretty clear. The image of Hercules on the left is depicted nude, as was common in Greco-Roman sculpture, with defined and realistic or naturalistic musculature indicating close observation of the human form. He's further depicted as a strong bearded man holding a wooden staff. And in the image of Vajrapani on the right, you have something that's quite similar. You have a nude, or largely nude except for a sort of swath of cloth, bearded man with defined musculature that is rendered in a rather naturalistic fashion, holding what looks rather more like a staff than like a lightning bolt. The occurrence of nudity in Buddhist art here is particularly notable because outside of tantric Buddhism, which strives to, in a sense, to be transgressive in terms of norms related to sexuality, purity, and death, it is really quite rare to have the nude form depicted in this frank manner. So what we start seeing is a lot of direct borrowing and mixing and remixing, just done in a conscious way, of which this is one example. So for context, this is an image of a Nepalese statue of Vajrapani, the same deity that we were looking at in the previous slide. And in thinking back to what we just saw, I think it's obvious that this piece is coming from a very different cultural milieu. Granted, it's from a different country, from very different time period. But I include it just to give you an idea that the form of depiction that we saw in the previous slide is not a given, and is instead really a product of the melding of cultures that we see as a result of the Greco-Buddhist culture of Bactria that would be inherited by the Kushan Empire. And as well as borrowing of specific poses and attributes between Greek and Buddhist arts, or Mediterranean and Buddhist art, I should say, I think we can speak of a more general stylistic melding as well. We can note, for instance, the attention to detail when it comes to rendering the drapery, the softly modeled facial features, this sort of thing. This naturalistic approach, the quite human appearance of a divine figure, all of this is striking, especially when one considers perhaps more familiar Buddhist images, which often have a more stylized or abstracted approach. Here, for instance, the Buddha is given a head of long hair instead of the so-called snail shell curls that more stylized depictions often show. The ushnisha, which is the Sanskrit word for the bump on the head, which is a symbol of the Buddha's divine and special nature, is here transformed into a simple top knot, something that is realistic, that a real person, a non-divine figure could have. And all of this is interesting in terms of visual detail, but I think it really takes on greater importance when we understand it as a statement about the relationship between the human and the divine as it was conceived of at this time and in this place. The Buddha here is depicted as a human teacher, approachable, knowable, and not really fundamentally separate from us mortals. And if that is your conception of the divine, that has ramifications, of course, for how you worship and how you consider yourself in relationship to your Lord as well. Another thing I might mention here briefly is a couple of technical aspects of the art of this region and this period. So much of this Greco-Buddhist art, so-called, is carved from a stone called gray schist, which in a certain sense presents several technical difficulties for the carver. For one, it has a tendency to do what's called delamination, which means that the layers separate from each other. And so the ability of sculptures of this place to nevertheless master master this material and produce such skillful depictions, I think, speaks to a high degree of technical sophistication that was achieved in this region. The surviving stone sculptures do not have traces of color. Later on, we see plaster sculptures that do, and so we can get sort of a sense of what the temples might have looked like, filled with color and life in that sense. And another thing that I might mention here is the reuse of damaged or broken sculptures. So for instance, at a site called Sari Balbol, which is near Peshawar and which is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, we see large deposits of damaged sculptures, as well as broken sculptures that are buried inside stupas in that region. There is a common misconception that Buddhist art does not have an idea of conservation as one conceives of it in the West. That is, there is an idea that Buddhist worshippers don't value broken things or damaged things. But I think here in the practice of preserving these damaged pieces, these older pieces, and recognizing that they have a historical value as well as an aesthetic value, we see a Buddhist approach to conservation that I think has perhaps ramifications for when we consider conservation in the present day as well. So another piece of comparison and reference I would like to provide is another image of a seated Buddha dating from about the same time as the one we were just looking at, which also comes from the Kushan kingdom, but from the other side of the empire. In this case, from the city of Mathura, which is on the Ganges River. So here, I think the contrast really helps to highlight the strength of Mediterranean influence in the former piece and the importance of intercultural mixing in producing the art that we have that survives from this region. So this Mathuran piece, which was not created in a Greco-Buddhist cultural milieu, is, I think it's fair to say, much more stylized. The drapery, for instance, is rendered as a series of concentric rings. So here, for instance, it's sort of straight lines. And on the shoulder as well, it's a bit hard to see, but it's sort of straight lines instead of falling along the sort of contours of the body. The cloth itself clings to the contours of the body underneath in an exaggerated fashion. And the overall build is quite stocky and suggestive of statues of protective nature spirits or yakshas. To be clear, I don't wish to say or imply that a naturalistic approach or a stylized approach is better or worse. People choose to portray objects or figures in a certain way, not necessarily because they cannot do it differently, but because the style they have chosen has cultural meaning to them, is meaningful in a way beyond merely an attempt to mirror the world. Instead, I merely wish to point out these differences and how they highlight the importance of Greek influence, Greek and Mediterranean influence. I also want to note in passing that I'm emphatically not trying to posit the entire arc of iconic Buddhist art history as the product of Western influence. As I mentioned, for instance, a number of scholars have looked at the role of Middle Eastern sites like Palmyra upon the development of Greco-Buddhist art. And what's more, it's important to note that parallel moves towards iconic representation of the Buddha were occurring in centers like Mathura around the river Ganges at about the same time, and these seem to have been largely independent. Nevertheless, I think it's undeniable that Greco-Buddhist art holds an important place in the overall history of the Buddhist art historical canon. And there are ways of framing this, I hope, without falling into the trap of earlier colonialist art historical narratives. So, as was mentioned earlier, beginning in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, the Kushan Empire begins making concentrated pushes northward and into the deserts of what is now Xinjiang. In the process, they are able to control the trade routes around what is called the Tarim Basin. And it's at this point that we really see the crucial role that Central Asia played in transmitting Buddhism to the East. As the empire expands militarily, we also start to get waves of missionaries heading from Central Asia into China. And this is motivated, as I said earlier, by the very strong Buddhist scriptural notion that propagating the teachings is a meritorious act. As the earliest surviving written records we have of Buddhist monks actually going to India to collect Buddhist scriptures themselves is Fajian's travelogue written in the 5th century. China's understanding of Buddhism was, prior to this, largely mediated by Central Asia and its visual culture for the first several decades of the religion's presence in the country. As Eva Hong notes in her book, Translation and Cultural Exchange, Central Asian monks proved invaluable as conduits for Buddhism into China, not only because, unlike their fellow monks from India, they tended to speak Chinese, the ones who went to China, but also because a number of them would have had a bicultural upbringing, such as an education in Chinese Confucian values, that would have allowed them to more effectively communicate with their Chinese audience or translate philosophical language into terms readily comprehensible to new viewers. And not only was Central Asia a center of Buddhism, but it was specifically a center of sutra production, and as I mentioned before, translation. It is largely thanks to the work of Central Asian translators that Buddhism was made not just available, but intelligible to local populations. And the oldest extant Buddhist books in the world come from what is now Afghanistan. They were found in clay jars buried in a monastery and were written on birch bark paper. Though extremely fragmentary, these texts, which are 2,000 years old, are notable for the fact that they're written in Gandhari, not Sanskrit, which testifies to a desire for linguistic accessibility, though of course it should be noted that literacy at this time was hardly widespread. As Buddhism spreads and solidifies in this region, we also start getting monastic communities solidifying, often close to oases. In Tajikistan, for instance, the monastic community of Ajina Tepe is founded. Its architectural style testifies to cultural dialogues with Sasanian Iran. So an architectural feature called the Ivan, which is a rectangular building with 3 sides enclosed and 1 side open, was used in Persian palaces prior to this, and would later be used as a major design element in both mosques and madrasas with the advent of Islam. Today, however, Ajina Tepe is perhaps best known for its monumental sculpture of the great passing away of the Buddha, often erroneously referred to as the sleeping Buddha, which is depicted here. Though much of this is reconstructed material as opposed to original fabric, and it of course has been removed from the site and transplanted into a museum context. In addition to looking at the theological and cultural shifts that we see under the Kushan Empire, I also want to emphasize the technological sophistication and innovations that we see in this art. So the statue seen here is one of a pair of famous Buddhas from Bamiyan, in what is now Afghanistan. Bamiyan was a Buddhist area since probably the 2nd century of the Common Era, but the statues themselves were not constructed until the 6th century. One is pictured here in the larger, and it had a smaller twin. And a third reclining Buddha, which actually survives today. And as sculptures constructed in the pre-modern period, they would have been enormously complex undertakings. They were hewn from stone by hand, then plastered with a mixture of mud and straw, and then coated with stucco and painted. Wooden pieces drilled into the stone would have served to fix the plaster layers on. So you can see here a number of holes, and these would have been the supports. The arms, which are now missing, were done separately, modeled around wooden cores, and would have been in a mudra, or a sacred hand gesture of some kind. From Chinese travelogues to this region, we know that the statues would have been covered in jewels. And these travelers seem to think that at least one of the statues was made of metal, indicating that they may have had bronze face masks originally. What's more, one of the most remarkable, if little known, things about Bamiyan is that in the niches and caves on the sides of the sculptures, scholars have identified traces of oil paint on the walls, which makes this site home of, by far, the world's oldest oil paint, 6 centuries before Jan van Eyck, who was the Flemish painter widely and erroneously credited with inventing oil paint. So speaking of the caves at the side of Bamiyan brings me to my next point, which is that while a number of freestanding structures with Buddhist history survive, many of the most famous extant examples of Central Asian Buddhist art come in the form of painted cave temples, a number of which survive in the desert regions of Western China along the former Silk Road. The term cave temple is a bit of a misnomer because in reality, these sites were deliberately excavated archaeological architectural spaces, not, as the name suggests, repurposed natural features. Buddhist cave temples have their origins in India, where you have not only Buddhist but also Hindu and Jain examples. These temples further south tended to mimic wooden architecture and form, and often included elaborate carvings both inside and outside. However, the sandstone that characterizes much of the geography in Western China and other parts of Central Asia made comparable carvings difficult, if not impossible. So instead, what we tend to get is enormously inventive wall painting. And when one talks about wall painting on mud walls, this sort of flat term, murals, really obscures what I think is an enormous degree of technological and technical sophistication, which would have necessitated not only years of training on the part of an individual artist, but also possibly centuries of trial and error in order to perfect. What looks at first glance to be a simple wall is in fact composed of numerous layers of plaster that have been painstakingly mixed with different additives. Plant matter or hair, including human hair, would be added to allow the earth to grip the stone walls, while sand would also be added in just the right amount to prevent the plaster from cracking as it dried. With each additional layer of earth, the additive would grow finer and finer. So the base layer might be quite rough with a lot of woody matter in order to help it grip the stone wall, while the last layer would only contain very wispy and fine plant matter or hair so that the texture wouldn't disturb the paint that it eventually supported. In these cave temples, we also do have sculptures, but they tend not to be carved out of stone itself, as one might see, for instance, in India. Instead, what you have are statues that are built up of clay or sometimes lacquer around a wooden armature, similar to the arms of the Bamiyan Buddhas that we were discussing earlier. And again, this is a technique that would be carried eastward along the Silk Road and influence the Buddhist art of China, Korea, and later Japan. Advancing, but it's not so important.
Too fast.
In order to execute the complex decorative schemes at these sites, artists would often do sketches in red paint, using stencils or guiding lines to create repeating patterns, such as the so-called Buddha field pattern, in which we see tens or hundreds or even thousands of Buddhas represented in a single cave. And this repeating motif itself is indicative of a major theological shift, which is the birth of what is called Mahayana Buddhism. Mahayana Buddhism is a form of Buddhism that was born probably in India and brought into Central Asia and quickly transferred along the Silk Road by Central Asian translators and missionaries. So Mahayana, whose name means great vehicle in Sanskrit, can be contrasted with Theravada Buddhism, whose name means the way of the elders, and which is the form of Buddhism that is generally, although not exclusively, practiced in places like Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka. You sometimes hear Theravada Buddhism referred to as Hinayana, which means lesser vehicle, but that name is perhaps, for obvious reasons, considered distasteful and offensive by its adherents. Whereas Theravada focuses its worship on the Buddha and on the idea of gradual progression to becoming an arhat, or a perfected person, Mahayana focuses on the idea that it is indeed possible to achieve enlightenment in this lifetime now. Mahayana ideal, the notion of the Bodhisattva, which is a holy being or individual who postpones their own enlightenment in order to help others along the way to spiritual progression. Another distinguishing feature of Mahayana Buddhism is that the pantheon, the size of the pantheon, explodes. So rather than focusing religious devotion upon one Buddha, you get the idea of many Buddhists existing at the same time and in a sense sort of out of time, in sort of a cosmic realm. And you also get a vast panoply of bodhisattvas who themselves become objects of cultic worship. As at the same time, the Buddha and other holy figures are seen less as human teachers, which is what we saw in the Gandharan example we looked at earlier, and more as cosmic celestial beings that transcend our earthly realm, but that compassionately aid human beings nevertheless. The emphasis on endless repetition of multiple Buddhas, as you see here in the wall paintings at Kizil, is a reflection of this new notion of the Mahayana cosmos as being populated by many beings. Moreover, you also see an increasing emphasis on depicting the Buddha as a heavenly king, what's known as a Chakravarti in Sanskrit. So here, for instance, the Buddha is surrounded by a head halo and a mandorla or a body halo. He's shown proportionally much larger than the other figures around him, which indicates his relative importance. He is supported by lotuses at his feet. And so there's a lot visually here that really emphasizes divine or special nature and separateness from the average person. So for reference, we see some average people at his feet, which are donor figures, here, who probably would have financed the painting in this case. So this is a far cry, as I said before, from the Gandharan images we saw earlier, with their emphasis on relatability and humanity. Another increasingly common type of subject matter of cave paintings in Xinjiang is images of elaborate paradises, swarms of heavenly beings, and verdant green beauty with lush imagery. The pigments used in these and other scenes are made of inorganic materials, such as crushed ore, crushed stones, that are often very precious. So for instance, lapis lazuli is often used to make blue. And this also gives insight into the trade networks that existed at this time and the value that the societies that grew up around these oases placed upon the artwork that they financed. Lapis lazuli is only found in 2 places in the world. One is Brazil, which is obviously irrelevant to this example, and the other is Afghanistan. In some cases, we also have gilding that has been applied, though at a number of sites, the remnants of gold leaf has been scraped off in the intervening years. Nevertheless, through looking at the art, we get a sense of the extensive nature of trade networks, the wealth that was coming into these areas, and the piety of the community, such that they would expend their wealth and their precious materials upon the adornment and adoration of these images. Another thing we get a sense of is the diversity of these communities in an ethnic sense and a religious sense. Central Asia's flourishing trade routes meant that it was an area of cultural and religious mixing. In addition to Buddhism, we also saw the presence of Nestorian Christianity, the presence of Manichaeanism, which is originally an Iranian religion that focused on dualities. And as such, it's not surprising that this wealth of different cultural influences is testified to in the artwork, including at Buddhist sites. So in Buddhist wall paintings, one prominent motif that we often see is what's called a pearl roundel, which is a design element that has its roots in Sasanian Persia, but which traveled through Central Asia and into China and eventually Japan. We also see the direct depiction of various religious and ethnic groups in quite keenly observed ways. These aren't caricatures, these are sensitive depictions. So here, for instance, the donor figures that I pointed out have been generally identified as Sogdians. And here is a different painting from the same site, where we have a procession of female Uyghur donors who can be identified by their hairstyle. So the overall vision, I think this gives us, is of a mixed society that came together both in patronage of this artwork and ultimately within the constructed worlds of the artworks themselves. And I think this speaks to the themes of liberalism and tolerance that Dr. Shamshia was speaking about earlier. So in closing, sort of in contrast, I want to talk a little bit about the state of this art today. So what are some conservation challenges, for instance, and how might we safeguard this cultural heritage for the generations to come? Earlier in my talk, I discussed the Bamiyan Buddhas of Afghanistan, and as many of you may perhaps know, in March of 2001, these two standing statues were destroyed on the orders of Muhammad Omar, who was a Taliban leader, who had the bombing filmed and broadcast as sort of a deliberately inflammatory gesture. Another major Buddhist site in Afghanistan, Nes Ainak, is endangered by the fact that it sits on top of major deposits of copper ore, an economic temptation that is perhaps difficult to resist, even if it's doubtful how much direct benefit the mine, which is run by Chinese contractors, would actually bring to the local economy itself. Climate change, which is causing desertification, temperature fluctuations, extreme flooding, and other unpredictable weather events, presents an increasing challenge to Buddhist sites, not only in Central Asia, but indeed to all material culture throughout the world. Meanwhile, academic courses in conservation, as I can attest, continue to privilege Western material in terms of research funding and curriculum building, meaning that the state of the field, when it comes to addressing the particular conservation needs of non-Western art, such as how one might preserve paintings done on mud plaster as opposed to the types of plaster that you see in Renaissance frescoes, for instance, lags unfairly behind. While international bodies that fund heritage preservation, like UNESCO, present a number of barriers to entry for countries in the global south. While Buddhism's artistic heritage in Central Asia and elsewhere faces mounting economic, political, and climatic challenges, understanding its history and importance in the development of world art, and as an exemplification of tolerance and coexistence, is, I believe, an important first step in resolving the change of situation. Thank you.